Welcome to The Recognized Authority. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott, and today my guest is Camille Moore. And we're going to talk about how to nail marketing the simple way because we both think that many people are overcomplicating it. So, Camille, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, I have seen so many great videos from you, and you are putting out a ton of video content and other types of content on LinkedIn. I actually think that you were definitely nailing LinkedIn, and I'm really interested to chat with you about positioning and content creation and all of those types of things. So let's talk let's talk about the first topic, which is the simple way. What to you is the simple way to do it?
Not overcomplicating the message, the style, the approach, and what you're trying to do. Like, good marketing is simple.
Why are we getting it wrong then? Like what are we overcomplicating? What do you see people doing wrong?
It's not as simple. We should do a drinking game every time we see simple. We should take a drink. Uh, but it's not where I think we've gone wrong is we so much of where you can make money and what's been so awesome about the internet and opening it up to being able to meet people you would have never had the opportunity to be able to meet and not knowing really how the platforms and algorithms work is what is overwhelming us. And it's been a really interesting journey for me upon kind of content creating and putting my ideas out there to realize that it wasn't just me. Like, I felt like I was in marketing and I was running this agency and I was working with clients and I was so hungry to learn and to figure out kind of that secret to success on digital marketing, and I couldn't find it. And it felt very like lonely, like it's a me thing, it's not an us thing. And the further I've gone into this, the more I'm realizing nobody knows what they're doing. And I think that that's why they're overcomplicating it because we don't know how the algorithm works. We don't know how to achieve virality. We don't know how to make money and to connect with people. Like, we have ideas of how to do it. But because there isn't like here's your blueprint, this is how you can do this to be successful, everyone is just overcomplicating their approach and they're making it more complicated than it needs to be. If that makes sense. But it's a journey. I'm still figuring this out.
Yeah, I think that it might be something along the lines of it's simple but it's not easy. At least that really resonates with me.
Totally. Totally.
Because you see people and
Well said.
people try to chase the algorithm sometimes, and I do it myself as well. And we're trying to optimize, particularly when you're in this content creation mode. You start to create content and start to put it out there into the world and see how it does. And quite a lot of the time, particularly when you've got a small audience and there's a lot of people don't interact, a lot of people lurking. And so you put something out into the world and you think, hey, this is actually pretty good. And it's just crickets. You get no feedback at all. And that's incredibly discouraging. And so then people can think, okay, well, what do I need to do? So you start looking at things like, oh, well, maybe I should do a LinkedIn pod, an engagement pod, or maybe I should change the way that I create my posts, and I need to do I need to start to do carousels maybe because that's what they're promoting at the moment, or I need to do video because that's what they're promoting. And they start to try and optimize for the algorithm in that way and figure out what that is. But I think that, it's like there's no one clear path. And the other thing is I think that the path is changing all the time as, the
Totally.
algorithms change, and that makes it more complex.
And I think what makes you touched on a really great point in two ways. The first is the reason why it's not easy is because it's always more. Like, you have to always be doing more. And that's what the algorithm really rewards is consistency but volume, right? And that's what's kind of the overwhelming for, like, it's not easy because you really have to commit to do well online. But the second piece and why it's hard for me to give an honest answer is you basically have to become in some ways like a data scientist, right? Like, I'll create a video that I think is fantastic, I'm really excited to put out there, and it will do horrible. And I'll do a video where I'm like, this is like the chat GPT video. Like, I had I just thought that I thought I'd had other videos that were way better and that video blew up. And it's it's exciting, it's frustrating, it's complicated because you're in this position where you know that you want to do well, you enjoy doing it, and you don't know what is going to work. And then you try to kind of retroactively analyze it, and then something else that you wouldn't expect does well. And then it kind of it's this constant state of what am I doing? What's going on? But what it comes down to is if you're providing value through education and quality information, and you're not focused on only selling, that works.
I heard Alex Hermosi talking about something recently on one of his podcasts and YouTubes,
He's
and
great.
he is really great, and he was talking about how where he went to a like an invite only YouTube creators meetup, and how they were talking about how to how to get 10 million views or 40 million views on a video, and how one of the guys there was disappointed with how his video did, and one of the other guys looked at it and they watched 2 seconds of the video, and he said you didn't you didn't match you didn't commit to the thumbnail in the first 2 seconds of the video. That's it, done. And like there's so much detail, and his point was that people who are operating at the highest levels, there's a whole bunch of detail to what they're doing that is making their stuff really good and work really well. So how can those of us who are not that experienced and are not superhuman ever come close, or don't have big budgets, ever come close to doing that, like when we're just starting out? And I realize that there is a learning curve, and we all have to go through that learning curve. But
Yeah.
I feel like the learning curve, there's a lot of people dropping off because it's just too hard.
It it's it's this is what actually makes me really excited to talk about this because I had been promoting and pushing video content for so initially when I started this, I was working with like lawyers and doctors. So kind of more of that like right brain A type personality. I'm like, the only way that this is gonna work is if you get into that space of uncomfortability and show who you are and why you're the best person for the job. Because otherwise all the marketing looks the same and it's just noise. So the best way to separate yourself, and regardless of if you're a one person firm or if you're a five-person firm or if you're a big firm, that's how you stand out. So I was saying this for so long, but it was the classic case of, I'm too busy to market myself. And it was a great excuse because I was too busy marketing everybody else. And at the end of the day, I was like, yeah, I'll do it next week or some point, or I don't need it. I'm so busy. Um, and it was my business partner that was like, you got to do this. Like enough's enough. Like let's do it. It was actually someone that we knew within like a professional kind of acquaintance friend that had started doing it. And he goes, it doesn't matter what you say to me. When I watch his content online, he is truly being an expert. So um, where I'm going with this is it doesn't take it it's not it's simple, it's not easy. So it's just when you're an expert, getting in front of the camera, starting to create content that drives value, that provides education, that is not an ad, does really well online. And it doesn't happen in the first video, it doesn't happen in the second video. And this is what's difficult being in my position as the agency, because you can get lucky and get a viral video in the first month or two. But typically you really start to see that return on the time investment 8 to 12 months later, because it's not the first video that somebody sees that goes, okay, I need to hire you or I must use you. It's maintaining, like being top of mind and becoming that authority within someone's hearts and mind. And that takes more than one video for them to say, you really are the best. And so the answer to your question is you have to be good at what you do. And typically the people who are the best at what they do are the worst at marketing themselves. So assuming that people listening to this are great at what they do, they care about what they do, they're passionate, they're experts in their field, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable because it is so worth your time, energy, and effort, and that friction period in the beginning, because nobody's good on video in the beginning. Go back, I can't even watch the videos of where I got started, and I still don't love the idea of video. Like I don't love the idea of, I put out a video and it looks kind of cringy or awkward, or I tripped up on some words and I'm cognizant of sounding and looking dumb because you can't always put together your sentences in a perfect way when it's live. But it's changed my life. And I'm able to have conversations with people like you. And what's the coolest thing is people want to hear what I have to say. And there's people that are way smarter than me listening to this that you're holding yourself back. Like you just have to be authentic. Capture who you are on video. Don't try to be anybody else and speak to your expertise. Like nobody has what you bring to your career. And those are like, how you were raised, where you grew up, where you went to school, the profs that you had, the patients or clients or customers that you've dealt with. Like all of those data points makes you a very unique service provider or business or product, whatever it is. Like the only way to look the same and be saturated is to do what everybody else is doing and not lean into your humanness.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and you're totally speaking my language here. So I think that one of the things that you mentioned there is, like I think, and I think of this in terms of like going to the gym. You do need to put in the reps, and going to the gym
Yeah.
seven times in 1 week and then not going again. That's not going to help you. But if you go twice a week for a year, that's going to be life changing. And I kind of feel like that's what content creation is like. And you don't know if it's going to be 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, or some of the guys like Alex Ramosi was talking about longer time horizons when he's talking to people who are really successful in content creation. He said that his his YouTube channel, that when he started doing strategy for it, he said, okay, I'd like this to be super successful and have 10 million subscribers in 10 years time, and I'm going to start making videos towards that now. And okay, look, I realize that's some kind of like he's a bit special in many ways,
Yes.
in being able to think, okay, I'm going to take that kind of time horizon, and like I do think that people are trying to uh are expecting too much
Too
too
soon.
quickly, and the idea that you're going to get great results immediately, it's probably not going to happen. But there's so much that you get from starting now anyway. I think that it's so important to start. And one of the things that you talked about was, the it's not the video that somebody sees now, but you're maintaining that top of mind presence. But when people go back and they see, well, like for example, I've got 125 episodes of this podcast, and people go back and they see that, there's this body of work that you have. You've got a book, you've got a podcast, you've got a YouTube channel with 100 videos or whatever it is, and people
It's a
see
footprint.
all of that. It's that body of work that elevates you. You're
Totally.
standing on top of that, whereas your competitors are standing on top of a 5-page website with no content on there.
Completely.
You
And
know,
it's super valuable, right? It's super, super valuable.
the other aspect I think is really important is when you are creating that content and you're learning like how to deliver it to video, how to talk to the camera and try and look at the camera as much as you can. You're learning how to make your audio sound better, all of those things. And you're trying not to say the word "so" a million times an episode like I do.
Like,
that's
like,
my filler word.
mine is like,
Yeah.
oh,
And I'm really trying not so hard not to say the word "so" now. But one of the things that happens as you do that is you're also figuring out how to talk about the thing, and you're also learning. Like you're still learning about your subject as you teach it, because that's really what we're doing, is we're teaching, and there's no better way to learn than to teach. And so what we're doing is we're creating this content, and it's forcing us to learn it better. It's forcing us to learn how to deliver it better, to explain it better. And I think that develops like that's what helps develop our voice. And so you as an expert, you are actually developing while you are creating this content. And I think that's really, really important, because it's not just about creating the content and the content attracting clients. There's this learning process that you're going through as well.
it's so true. And I think it's Gary Vee that said this, but I don't want to hang my hat on it. But it was someone to like one of these authority figures that speaks on kind of content and socials. And he was so correct that there's such a shortage. Like all we are doing is consuming content. like all walks of life. And it's not a young thing. Like it's all walks of life. The majority of the clients that I get off of TikTok are over 50 businessmen. And I ask them every time, I'm like, how did you find me? Like, and they're like, I've the world is changing. Like I put an hour into TikTok every day and I like the feed because it gives me business and marketing tips because I'm the CEO. I find a lot of wives of the husbands are finding my content and the wives are telling the husbands like you need to reach out and contact her because and where I'm going with this is there's just such a shortage of educational content outside of the kind of the typical boxes like there's just no shortage of content period like there's such a demand there's so much of people want everything that by putting content online there's just no downside exactly what you're saying like you're you're more you can more cogently and coherently explain your microscripts and your sound bites you're able to speak more clearly as an expert I get feedback of what kind of analogies and metaphors work the best and it allows me to be a better professional. I'm more involved in what's going on within the industry and the community by virtue of it's now become a major part of my job. And it also is fantastic to be able to connect and help with people all over the world. Like there's truly no downside to doing it once you get over that uncomfortability of I'm putting myself out there. But what's so funny to me is what doesn't click for so many of these professional service providers is they've been used to doing consults for 20, 30 years the consult now happens online. So all of those little metaphors and analogies and those like the little story you give during that 30-minute free consult, imagine if you can do that now with 20 times the audience, right? And that's actually where the consult is happening. Like you're lucky if you get someone to show up in your waiting room before checking you out online, doing their research, and not being stopped by another competitor that has better marketing, right? And that's what I think is really interesting.
Yeah, there's so much there I want to dig into. I just want to come back to one thing because I think this is important in like in this world. So we're in the world of B2B marketing for professional services, consulting type firms,
Totally, yeah.
right? And you're spending 5 hours a week creating content for TikTok. I thought that B2B people aren't on TikTok.
Everyone's on TikTok. There's more people on TikTok every day than there are on Google. There's over a billion users, billion on TikTok every single day. And there is I actually don't personally use TikTok. Like the running joke is that I actually think I'm too old for TikTok, which isn't true, obviously. But my main channel is Instagram. But it is 100% a fantastic business opportunity for my content to live on TikTok because that's where people are. And that's another kind of piece before you move on. Like every platform has their own audience. There's so much of everything on everywhere. And you can do really well on LinkedIn. You can do really well on Twitter. You can do really well on YouTube. It's a different audience. They're looking for a different thing. Focus on one thing that you're good at when you're starting out before you're trying to kind of do everything everywhere. And that for me, it once I saw the data and the numbers and how the algorithm on TikTok took off, it made sense to me just to double down. And YouTube Shorts and Instagram are kind of following. And I'm selective with the content I put on each platform, but it's funny because it's not for young people; it's for everybody.
Yeah, I'm kind of playing the straight man there because I hear this all the time. Like CEOs, yes, they're on LinkedIn. CEOs are also on TikTok. They're also on
Oh my
Instagram.
gosh.
They're also on Facebook. There is no LinkedIn doesn't have exclusivity on human beings of at the C-suite level. That's just people are everywhere, and so if you're creating content on those channels, they're going to be on there, and so I know that this is I know that this is a sport not a lot of people are listening to this are going to be into, but in the world of rugby, TikTok actually sponsored the Six Nations, which is a massive tournament in Europe in rugby, and so like they are targeting a very high spending demographic, and particularly in the business world, like so. TikTok are definitely gunning for that audience as well. They're trying to get everybody on there, and so I think that if you write off the entire platform on the basis that CEOs are not on TikTok, I think you're crazy. So that's just
No,
my thoughts on that.
this is your sign that if you think that People with money, power, and resources are not on TikTok. You are so wrong. Like, your opinion has to change right now because the algorithm, it's interesting, like LinkedIn isn't designed really to be a social media platform. Like the way that it's owned by Microsoft, and it is designed to be the leading job platform. So they make all of their revenue, or the majority of it, because ad spend is such a small fraction, in job postings. So you have to understand what the goals are and what the, like, how LinkedIn benchmarks success. And TikTok is all about attention and engagement and eyeballs. Like if you spend an hour, 2 hours on TikTok, like it taps into the most primitive part of our brain. Like it is so entertaining and engaging. And what you would see, Alistair, is very different than what I would see on my feed. Like it's so customized and tailored. But, and there is an important but, it's it, it's also based off of your goals, right? And what how you can kind of get that paper check. Like for me, TikTok is fantastic because I can be like, I'm an international marketing and branding expert. Anyone anywhere in the world can hire me. For my clients that are like local service providers, like a realtor, or they have some kind of a brick or mortar building, if it's not like a product that is saleable online, the strategy has to be different, right? And that's where somewhere like an Instagram platform can be more powerful, because you want that kind of that local audience and feel. So, and in addition to that, just to complicate this a little bit further, and let me know if I'm just going too broad and I need to kind of break it down and explain it a little bit more clearly. But the other thing that's interesting is a lot of clients don't understand how to benchmark their own success. So if you're to go back to the example, like if you're a realtor in Los Angeles or in New York or in Toronto where I am, you don't need to have 10 million followers. Like unless you have a TV show, like that benchmarking doesn't make sense. Right. And what's funny for me is the videos that do the best, I've ripped apart Canadian brands and I've ripped apart American brands, and the Canadian brands never do well. The American brands do really well because there's a larger audience to look at, and the numbers are seismic, like they're huge in comparison. But the videos that actually get me the like sign check business is the ones that get 1,000, 2,000 views, like the marketing tips. And it was really deflating because I wanted to chase the big numbers. I didn't want to have these like small number videos. But as I've been speaking with my clients about it, because they just find TikTok so interesting, and most of them find me off TikTok now, they're like, the ones that actually were my tipping point, the ones that I actually wanted to reach out to you and use you, is the one that you got 800 views on. And which is really important to give back to people that are benchmarking their own successes. Be cognizant of what actually works and what numbers make sense for what business you're in. Because Alex Hormozy is helping a much larger pool that he can benchmark 10 million followers on YouTube. Someone that is, the best dentist in Thunder Bay doesn't need to have 10 million followers. They just need to have something proximate to the size of that town.
This is very timely because I just put a video up on LinkedIn from a podcast for this week's podcast episode. I just put it up just before we went live. And I was talking about this concept of, numbers. I think that numbers in particularly in a B2B professional services space where we can have a global audience. But the actual numbers that we need, usually because the contracts are much higher ticket. Like if you're in some sort of B2C transactional commodity, like if you're selling bars of chocolate or cans of Coke, you've got to sell so many numbers to make a living from that. But if you're selling consulting services, you might get by on one contract every 2 years. That might be the type of work that you're in, and so you've got to find one client every 2 years if that's what you're doing. Now, obviously,
Totally.
you might want to find more than that, but the numbers that you need to access that are so small that they're a rounding error effectively, and so we don't need big numbers, particularly in this space. And I think the people chasing the big numbers are going about it the wrong way. The other thing is that you talked about the content that actually converts people being very different from the content that tends to get very popular. And I've seen this myself. And for example, the episode that I put out this week was a coaching episode. It was a coaching call rather than an interview. and those tend to get lower download numbers, but tend to result in more inquiries for me. And
Interesting.
that's how I've seen myself in my own podcast. So I think that's very true. There's another thing I want to go back to, and I just want to say thanks to Tim Bauer. He says thanks for having this conversation so informative and insightful. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for
You mentioned microscripts, and I just wanted to chat with you a little bit about that because I think that's an interesting concept, an interesting term as well. Can you explain what you mean by microscripts?
It's one of the it's one of the books that changed my career professionally, and it goes back to that awesome microscript that you had in this podcast, that it's simple, not easy, right? And what microscripts are is, I'll explain what they actually are in a second, but it's those taglines or phrases that stick with us for life. It's the uh, if the glove doesn't fit, you must quit. The just do it. The taste awful, but it works. It's the death tax. It's crooked Hillary. It's these these short taglines and phrases that have so much information, that tell you so much, that stick with you and stay top of mind, but are so simple. And good marketing isn't easy. It's simple. It can take me 2 days, take me a week, take me a month to develop these microscripts for clients, but they're so powerful in their simplicity because it's a story. And that's how we think, how we communicate, and how we share, is through microscripts. So, what a microscript is, and I have the book behind me, I forget who wrote it, something Sheepley or Sheely. Um, but it's basically, he explains he worked for the guy that Mad Men, who Don Draper was based off of, on Madison Avenue, and what kind of made the golden era of marketing, right? And where they were pumping out these microscripts and these taglines like left, right, and center. And basically, what is it's a 3 to 5 word sentence that is designed to basically capture and boil down a larger concept into kind of a simple tagline. And that's how we buy. And when you think about the best brands, if you think of how you explain something, like even, like Volvo, they've owned the safest car in the world. They haven't won an award for being the safest car, and it's something in like 10 years. But like they have this microscript that when we think I'm going to buy a safe car, we all think of Volvo.
It's interesting. So there's the branding aspect of that, and then one thing you talked about there is explanation. Now, one and I'm not
Psychology,
sure if
yeah.
this is a microscript. You can tell me if this is or not. One thing that so I like to talk about the importance of specialization and niching down quite a lot because I think that it's something that was really important for me. And I think that it's important for anybody who wants to be successful. And one of the ways I talk about that is so my podcast and business is called The Recognized Authority. And I think that if people want to become known as the recognized authority in their field, they have to choose the field because you don't get to be the recognized authority in everything. So
No.
to be the recognized authority in your field, you have to choose your field. So that for me is a microscript, or at least I don't know if that's the
Yeah, it
way that you're
totally
using
is.
the term. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so and that's a really important concept for me in talking to people about this because I know that selling people on the idea of specialization when they're a generalist, that's a tough sale because a lot of generalists are absolutely terrified of the idea of niching down. So and it's a tough process to go through. So it's important. I think that the value of specialization, getting to a different point, but I think that the importance of specialization is so it's crucial, and you have to do it. So
And that's what a microscript is, right? Is it's not trying to say you do everything, right? Like what's so great about the it tastes awful but it works is there's so many medicines that actually work. But when you think of getting sick, you actually want Buckley's because their microscript leans into exactly the worst part about it. But it also reminds you that it works. Like it's a specialization. And to further what you're saying, the reason why that book is so powerful for even non-marketers that may be listening to this is it's the psychology of how to communicate. Like no matter in whatever business you're in, you're selling yourself, right? In some regard. So you need to find the way that actually is going to stick the best. And when you think about like when I was explaining coming on your podcast today, I use language around the microscript that you gave me. He interviews, the best people in every industry. It's a recognized authority. He's interviewed Christo, and you name off the names because you gave me the micro script to convey that story further. And that's what good marketing is. It's the ability to sell you through simple language that sticks.
Yeah, I love that. It's really simplifying things. Um, so okay, let's see, because I want to wrap back around to this nailing marketing the simple way, and actually giving people who are listening or watching, giving them some sort of guidance,
Yeah.
actionable advice, because I think that advice is great, and education is great when it's implemented. If it's not implemented, then it doesn't really have as much value. So how do you think somebody who's thinking about this should go about it?
Okay. So there's a few steps to deciding kind of what the best path is for you, and there's one part of me that says make no excuse, like the quality of the cameras on iPhones, like how you can, like, even the way that the TikTok app is built, like it's truly designed that there really is no excuse, right? But I'm gonna take a step back as a branding expert that works with top luxury brands, and give you kind of some tools that I think will hopefully help you match your brand kind of what it's a, the standard of kind of where it's worth. So typically what I help businesses do is you want to look at what your gross revenue is, or what your projecting gross revenue is, and you want to put aside 10%. And whatever that 10% is should go to your marketing. So you want to do 10% for maintenance when you're launching a brand, or when you're starting out, you want to do 15 to 20, because it takes a little bit more to get brand awareness. It takes about 7 to 8 impressions for someone to see your brand and what they offer, for them to click together to get that kind of association. So it took you 7 times or 8 times to see the Bounty paper towel in the grocery store to think about what Bounty is in your life and how it could serve you. So when you're launching, that's why you want to have a little bit of a larger budget, because more impressions are basically king for that brand recall and brand awareness. So depending on what that number is, what business you're in, what goals you're trying to achieve, and what you're looking to do, gives you kind of some kind of baseline and benchmark for budget. And if you're in a higher end business, you want your product to match your brand. And that's a very important thing, is it shouldn't be an excuse. And if you're starting out, it is so important that you're creating content, period. And we'll get into a second of how to do that. But if you have a higher caliber brand or business, it's really important for your content to match that. So based on that kind of that benchline of how much money you have to work with, allows you to decide like both labor and materials. So that could be like doing your own little setup in your office, like creating an area. And that's what we did for the TikToks that I have. Is we just have an office in our office that we just painted black. It's still functional for work, and we have the kind of equipment there. Spent minimal money, like I think it's like under 3 grand or 4 grand, and it's paid dividends. So it doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be high budget. You can do things like get video editors off of Upwork. Do some research to figure out, it's never been an easier time to build and grow a business online. There is no shortage of resources, whether they're local people or online people. But if you're in a medium to higher end business, make sure your content matches. And then once, I'm sure that you'll probably have some questions with that, but I can just move on to kind of how to do it. So when you're not, so for those that are listening to me, when you're marketing a product, like if you were selling like an iPhone, that's very different than like selling who you are as a person. So starting with who you are as a person, you want to get warmed up with interrogative led questions. So that's the 5 W's: the who, what, where, why, which, and how. So this is an easy way when you're starting out, because it provides you a hook, which is what you were talking about with Alex Ramosi. So when it starts with a hook and it's very focused, so it allows you to lean into the meat of the video right away. People have short attention spans, so you want to get to the point quicker. So uh, how can you develop content as a professional? Uh, the best way to develop content as a professional, or one way to develop content as a professional, is to develop a budget and to start with interrogative led questions. And I did a video on this yesterday. So that's kind of the best way to start. And then where this kind of goes straight or complicated is no two people are going to have the same audience network and kind of feedback and data points. And that's what makes the internet so great is people are actually able to connect with you as a person and make their, slight judgments on the length, like my tone, my tenor, the way that I look. Like we're designed to prejudge as humans. So you can see through the camera if I'm the right kind of person for you. And based off of that very important but also slight nuance, how your content performs is what you need to be constantly auditing and trying new things and pushing the boundaries to see where your kind of marketing is going. So the first part is to start. The second is to be constantly looking at it, tweaking it, kind of giving yourself that self-diagnosis and trying to see how you can improve it or push the dial. And then based off of that feedback, whether you're doing it alone or with a professional, is how you can kind of continue to take your marketing to the next level. Um, do you think that I missed anything, Alistair, or is anything unclear?
Yeah, I think that's really clear. The the way I think I what I suggest to people is, and I actually offer this as a service now because I found it really useful and found it with some one-on-one clients. We found it was really good when I actually interviewed them. So I would get them
Yeah,
on camera and interview them about their topic, and so I actually turned that
and they're
in.
the
So I
best.
turned that into a productized service because hey, I'm already a podcaster, so it's very easy for me to interview somebody,
Smart.
and so what I do is I interview people on camera, and we then turn that into their content. But so I think what's really important is to have an overall picture of your strategy, what's the problem that your ideal clients are facing, and then get really repetitive. And I think this is the hard bit, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. People find it hard to be repetitive on social media, but I think that
Yeah,
we need to be a little bit repetitive. Can you talk about how you think about
you
that?
have to. So it's a it's I've actually got a story for that that I hope will be helpful for those listening. So this is a few years ago, and I've been fortunate to maintain a bunch of my clients over years, and we were just having like internal creative fatigue, right? When you're helping a niche service provider that offers like a very unique service, when you're doing for them, 3 posts per week for 3 years, it's hard to find new ways to be creative on the same message because you can't stray away from what they're actually selling. So, what we developed as an agency is we call them content pillars. And it's a great exercise for anyone to go through. And if I don't explain this clearly enough, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can send over a video or a quick voice note to kind of go into more depth on this. But the idea is that you want to kind of outline from like a high level, like umbrella term, the core tenets of your business. So if you're a marketing agency and you're trying to develop your social strategy, one can be like client experience, one can be, news and noteworthy, another can be convince, and then another one can be relate. So if we once you kind of have these like high level concepts, that's when you kind of start breaking down ideas that work around them. So for the convince, that's talking about our services, that's showing past work examples, that's getting client testimonials, that's me doing an interview with my clients. And that's kind of 5 or 6 ways that I can be creative and innovative over like pushing the same message. And then the same thing if we go over to the like, the client experience, that can be like how to sign up, what to expect when working with an agency, what services are best for you, what platforms would work the best. So it kind of gives me now, and we move through socials by trying to hit one of those pillars. So if there's 5 pillars, we do one of the three for the 3 times per week. The next week, we kind of move on to the last 2 pillars, and then we start it again so that the socials come across as very engaging and they're repetitive, but they're strategically repetitive because you're finding new ways to share the same information. And that's kind of one box. But the second box that you bring up that is very relevant is you have to repeat yourself on TikTok. There is, I don't want to say no one, but there's a very small sliver, and they're probably related to me, that has actually watched every single video. Like the reality is most people don't see your content. And it's the way the algorithm works too, is your content isn't, not every single post is also served to every one of your followers or people who would align with your content piece. So although it feels like you're repeating it over and over and over again, the reality is that it's the only thing that works. And if you look at the best people like Chris Do, um, Gary Vee, Alex Hermosi, their points are the same, and they're become a recognized authority over their kind of their shared message. And that was a big learning point for me. Is I'm the marketing and storytelling girl, and I have to find new ways to say that every single week. But again, another just key nuance to that before I move on. Um, you want to say the same thing, but you want to find different ways to say it. So marketing is storytelling, and then I explain microscripts. Marketing is storytelling, and I explain the Buckley's, case study example. Marketing is storytelling, and I'll explain how Wealth Simple is connecting to an older audience and younger audience. They're tailoring the message to the medium. Like it's the same message packaged and sold in a slightly different way. And that's where you become that data analyst and analyzing. And what I've learned is when I do the overlays with the case studies and I'm talking about brands, people are highly visual. They like having the oration explanation as well as kind of seeing what I'm explaining when I bring in the Super Bowl commercial. And it was me saying the same thing, but learning from what works. So that was very long-winded.
No, that's
I
great.
hope that was cogent.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, well, I better start to wrap this up because we're coming close to the top of the hour. That there's some questions I like to ask people.
Yeah.
The first one is, what is the number one tip that you would give to somebody who wants to build their authority?
Lean in to who you are as an individual, why you are the best person for the job, and get comfortable being uncomfortable because you're helping more people than staying isolated and only talking to like the 10 or 15 that you may be able to change in a week. The internet is a great and beautiful place, and we want to hear from you. So don't hold yourself back.
I'm going to ask a follow up question on that because this is a
Yeah.
topic that I've thought a little bit about, and I hear people give this advice, and the question I have is, if you tell somebody to lean into why they're the best at what they do, and they don't feel like they're the best, what can they do? Like if let's say I'm a podcast coach, and I feel like I'm a pretty good podcast coach, but I'm not the best podcast coach because there are people like John Lee Dumas, for example, who has done 3,000 episodes or whatever crazy number he's done so far. What do you do if you feel like you're not the best?
You just have to be authentic, like what Pete is saying. Like you, it, I, there's, there's some demons or baggage that we might need to unpack, and it sucks because at the root of your question, like what upsets me or what gives me the most joy when I get to work with this kind of person is everyone listening to this knows about that number one player in their major market or city, and they're typically not the best person for the job, but they're so comfortable with putting themselves all over billboards and all over bus ads and bench ads and radio ads, and it's frustrating and daunting because you know that they're not the best, you know that they're not servicing people the best, but they're comfortable with putting themselves out there. And it it's disappointing to me because anyone that cares about what they do and puts their time, energy, and effort into their craft and their career is worth having an opinion online. And it's up to kind of your commitment to the cause and what you're able to share, and for the internet to tell you and decide if they want to hear what you have to say. But often it's them holding themselves back, that first step where we can't really unlock and see. And I get to work with the greatest people in the world that would have never thought to put themselves on video. And when you meet with them, they're so humble, they're so kind, they don't like to over speak about themselves. But that's exactly who I want to see online. If I'm looking, I want the doctor that actually cares, that actually wants to, know me since I was a child and watch me grow up and remember those small things about me. I don't want the person that I walk into their room and they're not listening to me because their phones are ringing off the hook and they're really not that good at what they do. So it if you feel a pang that it might be you, this is probably you and you should do video.
Love it. Yeah, and I think I can't remember the technical term, but there is a it's there's imposter syndrome, and then there's the correlation between the more competent somebody is, the more they realize what they don't know, and so they feel
Yeah,
less confident.
Dunning-Kruger
Dunning
effect.
Kruger, exactly. Sorry, that was the one I was trying to think of. Yeah, and so
Yeah,
I think that a lot of experts are deep into the Dunning Kruger effect. And
totally.
so don't want to put themselves out there because those other people are already saying that. And I think that it's important for people to hear it in somebody out there needs to hear it in your voice. I think that's important.
Totally. And they need to hear us too is stop being your biggest obstacle. Like that's why they need like a good interviewer to ask the questions because I'm always like floored. I'm like, that was so interesting and so cool. And I'd love to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't even think about it because they're so far deep in thinking that it's not anything, but it's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let me ask you: is there a business mistake or failure that you've experienced? Could you tell us what you learned from it?
Oh my gosh. I've learned so much. I was so fortunate to start a digital business when digital was in demand. So I grew too fast. I learned too much too quickly, and I'm still learning. What I will say though is you only learn from the shit. You don't learn from the easy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
every great practice that I've put in, or like, some kind of standard operating procedure has come from a difficult and shitty client, right? And although it sucks to have gone through that, like that's where you grow the most. I think my biggest kind of lesson learned is, and I don't have the answer to this, but how much I respect good managers. Like it's really difficult to manage humans. And I've learned by kind of going outside of my own sphere because when you're younger, you kind of yes, you may have, classrooms, but you don't understand the importance of communication and how communication styles differ. Um, so my biggest lesson learned is how to kind of communicate clearly, how to delegate, how to uh, instill leadership, um, and to have humility. Right, it's been very difficult to lead when I don't necessarily know what I'm doing. Right, in some situations, so it's something that I like to read a lot about. And if anyone listening to this has a good book recommendations, I understanding and maintaining human capital is something that is has been my biggest struggle because I love humans, but leading them is very different.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, on the idea of book recommendations, is there a book that's been really important for you, a business book or some other kind of resource?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm a voracious reader, so you and I could talk about this for an hour. But for the people that are in marketing, the Win Without Pitching Manifesto by Blair Enns is one of the best confidence books that I've ever read. That almost gave me kind of the language and the tools to be like, you're right. I shouldn't be treated like shit. And that's the thing that's really interesting in marketing is so much of it is like conceptual and creative. It's hard to kind of provide that value in the same way that like a heart surgery does. Right. But marketing is so important to businesses' perception, their broader bottom line, and their eventual success. So that one's a great one. The second one is that microscripts book. And I think it's important for truly anyone. Like if you're in business, if you're in sales, if you're in marketing, like to be able to communicate, like we can learn a lot from the biggest brands in the world. Like especially when you go back to like, companies like Buckley's and Clorox that are, they do billions. And we can learn a lot from having the brightest minds that have developed scripts to sell drugs, right? Like so that's a really great book for just understanding because marketers know how to communicate, especially the ones at the top, and the top use microscripts. So that was another really great book.
Cool. I'm gonna put the links to those in the show notes as well. And do you read fiction? Is there anything that you really love?
I so I went to school for English, so I went through I've read like almost every iconic Russian, American, and European literature book because for my degree. But the one that I've read the most recently that I'd recommend is Clara and the Sunflowers. Or sorry, Clara and the Sun. I will send it to you so you can link it properly. But it's a Japanese author who I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. And it was translated from Japanese into English, but it's a really fantastic book that kind of puts a different view and perspective on AI and kind of a dystopian future. And it's really interesting, insightful, and deep. And it was, there's few books I find that are like new books, not like, classic, iconic ones that where you really close the book and you're like, wow, I didn't think about it that way. So have you read any of his books?
No, I haven't, but I'm definitely going to check that out. And I just looked up there in Goodreads, and it's Clara and the Sun by
It is by
Kazuo
Kazuo
Ishiguro.
Ishiguro.
So I hope I got that right. So
It is such a good book.
very, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Camille. It's been great to chat to you about all of this today. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Well, TikTok gets the most amount of love. I try to post a video a day, so my TikTok is my name. As an aside, just for people that have many workers in their business, it was very quickly. I was doing content from the agency Third Eye Insights, and it didn't work because there was a bunch of different people that were trying to create video. So it's my personal Camille Moore. It's my name as a period between an underscore, but I'm pretty easy to find. And then, also LinkedIn and Instagram. But if you really want to get valuable content, it'd be TikTok. And I love making content. I love talking about marketing. So if you want anything covered, please drop me a line.
And I'll link to your TikTok channel on the show notes page. I think people considering doing any kind of online video should check that out, because the videos you're putting up there are great. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting about all of this today. And we blew through the top of the hour. Sorry about that. So I hope you don't mind. It's been fun to talk about this. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.